Sidney is an activist out of New York City, and today she's passionate about the intersection of activism and technology. I know from my personal point of view, I am going to benefit greatly from learning how do you be social active, particularly in this age of COVID. How do you use technology and online tools to really do activism in a whole new way? So thank you for taking the time, Sidney. And with that,
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. So thank you all again so much for giving me this time and for joining. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, specifically the chapter out in Falls Church. This is really awesome to be having this discussion. Just a little background again on who I am. My name is Sidney. I actually use they, them pronouns. And a lot of this presentation was prompted by, of course, COVID-19 that we are all still very much experiencing and entrenched in. And with COVID-19, even as the country opens, there's this emerging sort of need and rise of digital activism and engagement that will only continue to grow as a medium. So again, this presentation is meant to be a discussion, so feel free to have questions ready either at the end or throughout this, and definitely feel free to try anything out and write down questions for the end as well. But again, today we're really going to be discussing social activism and advocacy in a digital age. And if my Wi-Fi is terrible, just let me know. I can try and switch over to a different Wi-Fi or hotspot there. Awesome. So this presentation is not only going to discuss how to use digital platforms for activism, but it also tackles the following burning question that'll be at the center of this presentation and discussion. So how can I and all of us make a positive contribution to a cause digitally without hurting the efforts of other activists? So right now, I actually work in a startup company that is trying to work with a small city in upstate New York. And part of my job is to engage city council members in small cities, such as the one in upstate New York. Now with COVID-19, we're finding it really difficult to get agreements through the city council, to lobby and to really engage with them. And so what I've been doing as part of my job within the last week or two is actually joining as many Facebook groups as possible within that city to make sure I am engaged with the local community. I really understand their problems, and actively being a part of their community and is in a safe way. And then in addition to that, I've actually been attending these online council and committee meetings through Zoom, through Google Hangouts, to ask questions, to listen in, and to understand what the needs of the community are. And so when we look at parts of this specific question, right, how do I make a positive contribution? How do I do it digitally? There's also this idea that we have to be aware of both the pros and the cons of digital platforms. So one pro about digital platforms is that we're able to democratize the platform. We're able to invite people in and contribute and collaborate in ways that they weren't able to previously. And you're also able to expand your reach and your impact. However, with digital platforms, there's always a con. Whether I recognize it or not as sort of a millennial, that's another thing, but that's fine. But the idea is that social media and digital platforms have specific algorithms that are intentionally trying to give us tunnel vision, and can often put us in positions where we think we're making a contribution when instead it's more performative. And so what I mean by that is instead of actively, talking to your representatives and pushing legislation forward, it can often be easier for people to feel like they're contributing when they're actually just hitting like on Facebook, or retweeting something on Twitter. And this sort of performative activism or allyship is often called slacktivism. So this burning question is really, how do we use digital platforms such as Facebook, social media, even websites and newsletters? How do we make positive, actual contributions that are tangible without hurting the efforts of other activists? So today, just as a what to expect, I'm going to go through what is activism and allyship to me specifically, a little bit about sort of the digital arsenal. What are some tools that both people as individuals as well as on an organizational level, what are some ways that you can engage with your community? some example case studies, some websites and organizations that I find really are utilizing and leveraging digital platforms well, some suggestions that I have for individual activism actions, and then a little bit of time, hopefully, for questions and any discussion points as well. So, sort of jumping right in. What makes me qualified to talk to you? Quite literally nothing. And I hope that that's sort of a point in of itself. The idea that there is no one type of activism, but there are different compassionate ways and different ways that we can all work together through different mediums, such as digital activism, such as social media, to advocate for yourself, for press groups, and for your own local community. So this presentation is going to focus on those interpersonal connections, as well as organizational activism again. So I am in no way, shape, or form here to tell you how to advocate for your community, but instead I'm hoping this can offer you some tools and suggestions so that you all can equip yourself with ways to become more effective advocates in a digital age.
Hey, Sydney, it may just be my internet connection, but the slides, if they're moving, I'm not seeing them move. So maybe that's just my internet connection.
Gotcha. I'm on a slide now that says Activism and Allyship 101. Is that not the case for some folks?
I haven't. It's the front page still.
Yeah, I have the front page too.
Gotcha. All right. Let me restart this. Thank you for letting me know. Is my audio coming through okay though?
Yes, the audio is. Now I see Activism and Allyship 101. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let me know if that happens again. I'm more than happy to reset or whatever I did that troubleshooted this, though I'm not quite sure what it was. Perfect. So the first section that I'm going to discuss is Activism and Allyship 101. So this is really, what does activism and allyship mean to me through the lenses that I look at issues and things of that nature. So the first thing that activism looks like for me, and this is both in a digital environment as well as a non-digital environment, is it fits within three foundational pillars. So one, take stock of your community. Who is in your community, but also just as importantly, who is not in your community? What do they need? What are the resources that they need? What are the issues that hit home for them? What do they need from you and your organization to be able to set themselves up for success? And then also, what role do you play? And that, of course, can change day to day. That can change issue to issue, and it's very multifaceted. And sometimes your community is going to need a leader and a coordinator, and sometimes parts of your community are going to need a listener. And sometimes you're going to have to step back and do that active listening. Second part, thoughtfully hold space, especially in a digital age where it is, and I've definitely seen myself do this, it's really easy to quickly get heated, passionate about a topic and forget the purpose of your conversation. So it's really important that when you hold space in a digital environment, whether that's through these webinars or whether it's through, socially distanced face-to-face communication or, on Facebook comments, it's important to remember what your purpose is with those conversations and holding that type of space. Secondly, do your research, of course. You always want to equip yourself with as much information and as much, information and data in your arsenal so that you can go into every conversation fully equipped to continue that conversation forward and to build a better relationship with whoever you're speaking to. And then finally, remember, it's us against the problem, not you versus me. Oftentimes sitting, screen to screen, it's difficult to remember that there's another person on the other side of that, and that you want to try and tackle the problem, not just the other person's opinion. And then finally, be kind to yourself. We're all making mistakes. It's important to forgive yourself, but of course, learn from those mistakes and keep pushing yourself forward. And secondly, prioritizing self-care. You want to bring 100% of yourself to your activism and your allyship. And what that means is sometimes taking breaks throughout the day or whenever it is to make sure that you are taking care of yourself so you can continue to bring 100% of yourself and be there to show up for your community. And then moving to allyship. So very similarly, I look at allyship through three sort of pillars. One, abandon all assumptions. So it's it's critical that we think about the lenses in which we are looking at issues. So what that means to me is taking stock of my privileges and the identities that make up my life. So, for example, as a New Yorker, I'm very familiar with the MTA. I'm very familiar with all the rats that live in the MTA. And as an able-bodied individual, that means I don't have to worry about navigating the subway station and planning in which stations have elevators, right? Because I'm able to walk the stairs. I'm able to, as an able-bodied individual, not even have to think about how that impacts my route and my commute. New York City actually has approximately 472 stations on a good day. Of those, it has 40 stations with elevators on a good day. On a bad day, that's a lot closer to 20 because of repairs and maintenance. And as someone who's ridden those elevators, they do not smell good. And I really, really don't recommend them if you are able to avoid them. But again, as an able-bodied individual, I am able to avoid them. So it's really important to, when possible, test your assumptions and think critically and really take inventory of your privileges and your assumptions and constantly be listening to identify those, and also understand that you are always tackling issues and coming through those perspectives. 2, hold yourself accountable. We're all gonna make mistakes. It's totally fine. Just make sure we're listening and learning and apologize. When you start to feel defensive, because we always will at one point in time or another, stop and ask yourself why. 3, make sure that whenever you do feel defensive, or make sure whenever you are trying to hold yourself accountable, you're asking, are you trying to be right or are you trying to be better? And then finally, be ready to fail and try again. Remember that it's worth the risk and commit to trying again. So these are just some reminders for allyship that I find helpful to being allies to a variety of various communities. 1, we do not have the same lived experiences. We're all living and walking through life a little bit differently. The first priority is to always listen. And when you're conversing with folks from different walks of life, remember, they don't owe you a debate, they don't owe you a relationship, and of course, never fear the opportunity to do better. That's what makes us all better activists, that's what makes us all better allies, and it's what's going to sort of define the growth of yourself as an ally and an activist. So I'm going to give you all homework before I get into anything else, because why not? But I would absolutely sort of challenge everyone to look at their bookshelves, their podcasts, and their news sources. I recently did this and found, was actually quite surprised with myself. But try and figure out, who do they include and who do they not include? Do you have books that are written by people of color? Do you have podcasts that are produced and led by women? Do you have news sources that are written by queer folks, disabled folks, indigenous folks? So I would say over the next week or so, just start noticing these things. And if you can, find ways to always diversify your news sources, what books you're reading, what podcasts you're listening to. And the same goes for your digital community. What Facebook groups are you following? What Instagram accounts are you following? What digital news outlets do you follow? Are they written by people of color, women, queer folks, disabled folks, and indigenous folks? Cool. So now I've given everyone homework. We can now get into the reason you probably all came, which I feel like switches the order of things, but that's okay, because you all are still here, and that's fine. So I'm going to get into the digital arsenal, which is predominantly going to be centered around Facebook. I definitely would love for people to ask questions about other platforms, and I'm happy to answer as much as I can at the very end. But the focus of this specifically is going to be around Facebook as a platform. So Facebook is one of the biggest social media platforms. And now 1 in every 5 US adults get their news from social media. So whether you're using Facebook, whether you believe that we should be using Facebook, if it's good or bad, we're still faced with the reality that 1 in 5 US adults get their news from social media. And so it's important that organizations are at the forefront and have a presence, and especially digital presence on Facebook, to provide resources to their community. And this often happens in two different ways, through a Facebook group or a Facebook page. A Facebook group, is designed for clubs or communities, and they work sort of like a group email list. Again, I'll send this presentation out at the very end so people can take a look at the starter guide to learn more about what exactly that is. And the other side of this, besides a Facebook group, is organizations often usually have a Facebook page. So this is designed to be sort of like a mini website. And so while a Facebook group is more internal for your planners, for your community organizers, your Facebook page is for your larger community in general. So to decide whether or not you should build out a Facebook page or a Facebook group, it's important that you first figure out what are the gaps in your community, and also what are the gaps in the way that you're organizing. Could Facebook's tools help you fill those gaps? Is there a gap in the way that you're educating, engaging, and expanding your community, and how does Facebook fit into that? One other way to look at it is, what are the types of content that you want to push out, or types of things that you want your audience to read and reach, that you're either not doing, that you either could be expanding on now, or that you can start doing more of, right? So for a Facebook group, if you want to find different ways to plan events and plan campaigns, to share meeting minutes, to share existing campaign material, that's really great if you want a Facebook group. For Facebook pages, if you want something that is a platform to share more information about existing events, information on campaigns, informative content, places to donate, specific calls to action for your general community, a Facebook page might be a better fit for you. Again, you can have both. And they're both great ways to share additional campaign material. It's really important, again, to remember that digital tools should expand your message of existing campaigns. It's important to not launch into campaigns just for the sake of having a digital platform. You have to let the campaign and the mission drive the digital platform, not the other way around. So that's a little bit about Facebook as a platform. The other part that's really important is, how do you create and push out content? So content can be anything from a text post to a photo to an inspirational message, to even links to this exact webinar. And posting content is a great way to advocate for issues on a new platform and expand your reach. And it's important to make sure that you are catering your content to the specific platforms that you are pushing content out to. What you post on your website might be a little different from your newsletter, which might be lengthier and be a mesh of your other platforms. And what you post on that might be different from your Facebook, which might be shorter and might link you to maybe the webinar or the website or whatever it may be. And make sure that you're concise and can speak to specific campaigns so that you can always have a follow-up to all of the community members that are engaged. More than anything, you also need to be consistent with your content. Scheduling time to push out social media content to support your campaigns. Work as a group, try and figure out what schedule works for everyone. But the biggest thing is to be consistent. You don't want your community members to start expecting things in one schedule, and then the next week, there's a completely different schedule. So if you're posting twice a day, and then all of a sudden the next week you're posting 5 times a day, and then the week after you're not posting at all, that's going to sort of confuse your audience, as well as lead to possible inconsistencies down the line. And you can always ramp up your schedule. So always, yep, sorry.
Sorry, Sidney, there's a question in the chat that says, what are the strategies to convert Facebook followers to active volunteers? So I don't know if you want to take that at the end or work that in now.
Yeah, absolutely. I can actually take that in the next slide, which I might have a couple more visuals to help with that. But that is a really, really great question. And apologies, I think the chat's just a little off the screen for me. So continue to let me know if there are any other questions that are relevant. But I will definitely take that in the next slide. So again, just to close out on this, scheduling is really important. Always start with something that is very attainable, and you can always ramp up from there. And then the last thing too, as you're pushing out content digitally that might be spread and retweeted or reposted, is it's very often important to include trigger warnings. So you can think of this as similar to a viewer discretion for a movie. With activism, sometimes you talk about some difficult topics, and as such, you want to always be direct and honest with your language, but you always want to be sensitive about talking about subjects that may be difficult for certain people. So before you get into the actual content of it, just be sure to always put a trigger warning at the front. And an example is exactly what you see on the presentation there. And again, just to hit home on, doesn't really matter if you're for social media or against. The reality is that so many people are on social media and it's utilized appropriately and thoughtfully. And in 2018, 1 in 2 Americans were civically active on social media alone, which for 50% of Americans means that there's also a lot of potential to expand your reach and engage with existing members more. So now we've talked about that, I'm going to show or sort of navigate through, if you had a Facebook page, what are some of the tools that you could use to whoever posted that question, how do you convert Facebook followers, Facebook engagement into more active engagement within the community? And then also, how do you use some of the data that you're finding online and digital platforms and follow up and create more effective campaigns? So this is a screenshot of a page that I run that is actually my band. I'm in a rock band because why not? And this is what it looks like for me as an admin and as an organizer. So what I can see here are my insights for, I hope you can see my screen here. So you can see here on the left, I'm looking at my data insights, which looks at the engagement of people who are on my page. And you can see throughout the days, the number of engagement sort of hits on the Facebook page, pretty consistent Sunday through Saturday. And then also the times that people are engaged. So between midnight and approximately 5 a.m., no one's looking at my band, which is fair. And then you can also see all of the posts published in recent events, as well as a quick snapshot, the type of post, and the current reach and engagement. So what's really cool about here is you can see what types of posts are really engaging, really resonating with your community. You might find that posts that lead to quick resources or posts that have links to webinar get more traction. Or you might find that if your certain demographic works a certain time of the day or doesn't work a certain time of the day, posting at a certain time is going to be much more effective to getting them involved. So when you look at transitioning your community members digitally and getting them more and more involved in your community organizing, what you can do is use platforms like Facebook to make sure that the content you're posting, the way that you're talking about issues is really resonating with folks. So if you're seeing that maybe the people in my community aren't interested in one issue more or aren't interested in the way that we're talking about this one issue, you can start customizing and experimenting with the way that you're communicating your message so that more people will be more interested and more involved with the things that you're advocating for within your local community. And Facebook in this particular dashboard is just one way to take data and really drive that decision making forward. Awesome. Again, I apologize. I am not as tech savvy as I sound, so I can't actually see the questions, but I'm hoping that may have answered that question. I'm happy to take any other ones. Sarah, I don't know if there are any follow-up questions to that I can take now before I move on as well.
We don't have a follow-up question to that. The other question is a request for, at the end, if you could provide resources for the podcast, and we can certainly send that out with your presentation. But there was a request at the end, maybe you could elaborate on that.
Absolutely, happy to. Awesome. So moving right along, when you have a digital platform, the great part about that is that you're, of course, expanding your reach potentially and bringing in people that may not necessarily always be able to make it there in person. And that's really wonderful. And at the same time, it might also accidentally invite people who may not always be there to support your agenda. Or maybe they are and they just don't know how to communicate themselves in a way that is respectful and pushes your movement forward. So these 4 things are a couple of ways to moderate your channel, both with other folks within your community and outside your community who might be commenting on posts, resharing your content in a maybe disrespectful way, and generally just not being very nice. So the first thing for moderating content is be respectful. So, right, people don't always agree, and they don't have to, but they do need to be respectful. Passionate debating is fine, but abuse and insults are not. So if someone crosses the line, definitely tell them, and then show them the digital door. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. 2, be responsive, right? This goes back to the scheduling. Let people know when they might be able to expect to hear from you. If you know that you can only get back to them every 3 days, once a week, let them know in the about section about you on Facebook. But then when you can, be responsive and acknowledge people, both goods and bad things. If people are praising you or just want to know a clarification question, try and get to them as soon as possible so that you can constantly keep them engaged. And with that engagement, you can always link them to something of a follow-up question or to a follow-up resource that might be in a content post, that might be in a newsletter, or it might be on your website. So whatever it is, figure out a schedule and try and, as much as possible, stay consistent with that. 3, be human, right? We're all practicing being behind a screen more and more each day, but often it can be easy to forget that there's a person on the other side of that, and they are products of their lived experiences. And so interacting with those people as individuals and using language as you would in a sort of social setting pre-COVID is really helpful to making sure your message is getting across and that they are really feeling like they are part of this discussion. And 4, walk away. This is something that I am still practicing, but for some folks, you're not going to be part of that. For some folks who are just here to make trouble, it's not going to be productive use of your time to constantly be engaging them. So reply to them once or twice and then leave it alone. You are not obligated to respond to absolutely everything. Remember, the goal of both this presentation as well as digital activism for some folks is how can I make a positive contribution to a cause without hurting the efforts of other activists? That includes yourself. Pick and choose your battles, respond when you can, but also learn when to walk away. And this is definitely more of an art than it is an exact science. So that's Facebook for now, and I'm happy to take more questions at the end, as well as send over lots more resources, including this presentation, as well as anything else that I can. The second thing is to create a mailing list or find tools that can help you refine your mailing list. So MailChimp is something that I've used. There are many other wonderful ones that are very similar. It's just one that I would happen to recommend if you don't know quite where to start. There are free versions of it as well, but it's one of the many online mailing list tools that help you and your organization maintain and grow your engagement. And there's a lot of words on this slide, but basically there's a lot of different ways that you can constantly keep people engaged, even outside of social media. A mailing list is just one example of that. And it's really important that you set up tools that are going to help you sustainably grow in a way that's easy. And MailChimp has customized email settings. They have sort of ad campaigns that are templated out for you, as well as different ways that you can sign up forms so you don't have to have as much of that manual sort of organizing processes that often comes with sort of historical activism. And you'll be able to sign people up easily, keep them engaged, and keep them informed about what your organization is doing. If you do happen to use MailChimp, here's sort of the step-by-step guide on how to use it, because it can be, like many websites, a little tricky to navigate at first. But again, this will be sent out. And if you do like MailChimp, you'll be able to use this hopefully as a tool to help you get set up a little easier. Cool. So
Sidney, there's a question. There's a question on MailChimp. Sorry, there's a question in the chat on MailChimp that says, A, is it free? And B, can you use it to send out to get things like signatures on a petition? Does it have that capability? Question.
Yeah, absolutely. So MailChimp does have a free version that I pretty much exclusively use that I think works really well. it does have capabilities. So you won't have the petition sort of embedded in MailChimp itself, but you can embed parts of websites, you can embed links into it, so you can definitely link people quickly to petitions, to donation sites, to news articles, stuff like that. The idea for MailChimp really is just, it's easy templates that you can quickly pull together that will also have a database of all the people in your mailing list, so you don't always have to be manually adding people in or manually managing who you're sending what to. Hopefully that.
And then, yep, and there's a clarifying question, is a landing page the same as a home page?
Very good question. So not necessarily. So your home page, when you say bring up, so for example, with the League of Women Voters, you guys have a home page, right? That'll look the same no matter who types it in, no matter where you are in the world, and it's set up to look a very specific way. A landing page is going to be dependent on the link that they click on. So for example, if, let's say, the League sent me a newsletter that said, hey, we think you might be really interested in this new initiative that we're doing regarding voter registration, click here. And so it would take me to your website, but it would take me to a very specific landing page that's not your home page, but it's specific to the campaign that you're currently doing, right? So it doesn't clog up your website with all this information and make it super messy. Instead, it almost puts like a screen over your home screen so that it lets me know the information relevant to what I just clicked on, but it can still allow me to navigate to other parts of your website. I'm not quite sure if I did my best at explaining that, but hopefully it was a little helpful in clarifying the difference between the two. Awesome.
Our online, sorry, there's another, thanks, very clearly explained, so thank you for that. Are online petitions useful for effective change, or are they overused and therefore, so they're useless?
That is a really great question, and not something that I have a universal truth answer to. So yes and no is going to be my answer, which is a terrible answer. So petitions are sort of notorious for not driving real legislative change, right? Just because you're signing your name doesn't necessarily mean something's definitely going to happen. What they're really, really great for, though, are raising awareness. So if I'm sent personally to, and I can send a couple of articles that talk a bit about this. I think there was one in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago talking about the actual CEO of change.org. So I'm happy to send that around as well. But if I'm sent a petition and I sign my name, what will often happen is as I'm signing my name, I'm going to read part of that petition. And that allows me to learn more about what I'm signing the petition for, potentially expose me to issues that I didn't realize were as important as they were, as well as just raise awareness about the extent of the issue. So petitions aren't great at necessarily and consistently getting real legislative change, but they are really great at expanding reach, creating awareness about an issue. And they're also a really easy tool for friends and community members to just forward on to other folks. So the amount of petitions I get every day is more than I look at, but it is really helpful for me to understand what are the issues that my community is caring about and things that I know people want me to care about as well. Awesome. Happy to take any more questions here as well, and as well as others at the end.
That's it for the moment in the chat, so we'll keep going.
Sounds good to me. All right, so what I also wanted to talk about, so we talked about Facebook as a platform, we talked about content, we talked about the Facebook, the Facebook sort of back end, right? The analytics, how to use data to make data-driven decisions to really expand your reach. So what I wanted to talk about is a couple other tools outside of social media that you can use to inform the way that you're even creating campaigns. So there's a lot of Google here. I apologize, I'm very Google-based, but these are 3 different tools that I've previously used in various projects, within my job, within side projects that I have. that have helped me understand the relationship between communities and what they're looking for and asking for, as well as how, what's going on in the world, what's trending right now, what as an organization do I might need to respond to make sure I am hearing not only my local, but also on a global scale, what people are advocating for right now. So Google Trends, and again, I can send plenty more resources and answer any questions. So this is something that allows you to follow and, to its name, search trends between different topics. And so what it'll do is it'll show you how one search term on a topic is trending versus another, which could be really helpful when you want to figure out, hey, right now we've got two competing priorities and we really want to push these two things together, but we're not quite sure what our community members are going to respond to more. This can tell you how your community is feeling and what they're searching for on a national level, on a regional level, and also over a period of time. And I'll get into that a little bit more. Google Analytics is really helpful to measuring how people are visiting your specific website. So within the League of Women Voters, if you want to know what pages on my website are people spending the most time on, what are they not spending the most time on, what pages are they reading, what are they clicking on, how long are they spending on my website, this is a really good tool to either decluttering your website or also building out specific aspects of it so that you make sure that every part of your website is being used. And then finally, Google Alerts is something that's I use for work as well. And it's when you can set this up so that it happens whenever something such as a newsletter or a news article comes out, or you can set it up so it's a summary. And basically, you can alert yourself every time a certain phrase pops up in the news. So if you wanted to know every time the League of Women Voters Falls Church specifically pops up in the news, you can set it up so that you receive an email every time that pops up in the news. Or you receive an email once a week that'll send you a summary of that. Or if there are specific topics that you are really interested in, or if there are specific folks that you're, say, following, say the mayor, and you wanted to know every time there's an update, you can set this up so you are always up to date and informed about those specific issues. I'm going to dive in.
Does Google, the question in the chat box is, does Google charge for the tools?
So for Google Trends and Google Alerts, they do not. Google Analytics, I believe they don't, but I'm going to have to double check and get back to you if I'm being quite honest. I hope that is okay.
That's great. What we will do is we will double back and send an email out to everyone with not only the presentation, but also all the extra. You can send us the articles and the follow-ups, and we'll send it out to everybody that signed up.
Absolutely. And part of the reason I actually know that Google Trends is definitely a free service is because I used it earlier today to just verify something. So I'm going to show an example of how to use Google Trends, one a little sillier than the other, I guess. But what I did earlier today was look at the trends of the topic of millennials versus the topic of avocados. Because as a fun joke that I tell all my friends, and they all tell me, is that the reason millennials can't afford houses is because we spend too much money on avocados, which may or may not be true. We'll see. So here we can see a comparison of the amount of times that sort of the general public has searched the term millennials versus the term avocado. And as you can see here, avocado is seasonal because throughout the years it goes up in the summer and down during the winter, which makes a lot of sense. And then it also has been actually searched a lot more than millennials, with the sole exception of November 2016, which also happens to be, of course, an election period of time. So, but this is just an example of how you could start looking at trends and really understanding sort of how that fits in building your campaigns. So one more, perhaps a bit more concrete of an example is taking a look at Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign and women's suffrage as a topic. So again, you can see the relationship between the two, and they're a lot more closely linked. And you can see when they've spiked, when they didn't, sort of the response to certain events. And this is really helpful if you believe that there are certain issues and certain topics that are trending that you want to respond to, using data-driven decision-making to effectively allocate your resources within your organization to know what is our top priority right now to respond to. You know, what are some things we need to make sure we're also addressing, and using this almost as like a gut check, right? Using data-driven data and analytics to really understand what does your community care about. And what it'll do is also break it down regionally. So you can see on the right, the compared breakdown by sub-region. DC as a political hub, of course, is very concerned with presidential campaigns, so since they're first. And then you can see by state who else is really searching about this and really cares about this. And then in addition to that, you can also start seeing for people who searched Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, what else are they likely to search? What are the other issues that they want to learn more about, that they want to be informed about? And here's where you can start building entire campaigns using Google Trends as a source to inform you and make sure you're hitting all the right things that your community cares about. And so you can see here for people who also search for women's suffrage, they also search for the Black right to vote, as well as when slavery was abolished and suffrage colors. So you can start putting all these data points together to create a comprehensive campaign using, of course, digital tools such as Google Trends to inform how you're creating that campaign, and then digital tools such as social media, Facebook, your website, mailing list to push that campaign out to inform and educate your community. All right, so we're all gonna make mistakes on this, and that's totally okay. And I think 2020 has been a year where we've seen a lot of companies take steps forward in advocating for issues that they believe are important. And we've also seen a lot of companies fail to do that in a way that has been effective, and they've had to come out and apologize. And we all grow as activists and allies, and we're all gonna make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. Sometimes I think back about things I've said several years ago to my friends, and I get very embarrassed, and I never want to talk about it ever again. But we always have to gut check ourselves, because we're gonna have to talk about it. So what I wanted to do in this section was talk about how do we talk about our mistakes in a organizational setting and also in a digital setting as well. So how to apologize. The first thing we need to do is listen in order to understand. We need to listen to the feedback that we're receiving and listen for where we've made mistakes and assumptions, where we got defensive and when we've hurt someone. Then again, we need to learn from our mistakes and apologize, but only if we mean it. When it comes to digital settings, the first thing we want to do, and I've done this, I think I've done this within the last couple months, is delete something. I do not recommend deleting anything because it is the internet, so it will never actually go away, which is kind of scary. So if you have posted something that no longer reflects your views, don't just take it down. Instead, apologize and explain yourself. Make a sincere and honest apology. Then explain how either your beliefs have changed or grown or shifted, whether it's because of new information, whether it's because of a shift in your stance, whatever it is much easier and honestly more appropriate and sincere when you talk about the experience of how you got to something. And with the digital infrastructure that we have, it's never going to go away, whatever you posted. So it's easier and better to just own up to it and explain it and apologize for it and keep moving on. So I wanted to, and I'll do this quickly because I realize it's 7:45. I wanted to go through some very quick example case studies on what I believe to be very useful and effective use of a digital platform because of how concise they are, the way that they're visually formatted, as well as the sort of diversity and the types of content that are pushing out. And I think are very good examples to look at for when you think about how do we build campaigns, how do we communicate our campaigns, and how do we engage with people digitally to inform them on all the issues we are fighting for, and to make sure that they understand what we're doing appropriately. So the first person is AOC. She has a very wonderful digital campaign manager. I don't know who they are, but I think they do a very good job at communicating AOC's campaign in a way that is effective, in a way that is engaging, both visually as well as from a content perspective. So on her left is her website. And this is actually an example. So this is what her homepage looks like. But if I had clicked on her homepage through a different link, I might actually see something a little bit different. And that's the example of a landing page. I wish I'd put in a screenshot, but I will send all that later. But from her homepage, it's easy to see how you get involved. And that's one thing that can often be difficult with more traditional, say, activism routes. So there's so many ways to get involved, it's often hard to navigate and almost funnel all the interest. So what you can do is always have a digital platform to help you with that funneling. I actually went through this process myself. And once you put in your name and your address and your zip code and say, join us on that page, it'll actually ask you a series of follow-up questions on how you want to be engaged and involved, which can help you manage your resources and the type of engagement that people are trying to have with your organization. And then in addition to that, it's a very clean sort of navigation point at the bottom of that website to different things that AOC is covering. And then to the right, we have a couple of screenshots that I took from AOC's Instagram. And this is, I think, is a very good example of the type of content and the diversity in content that you can be pushing out. Not only can you be pushing out your stance on things, right, but you can also create very simple, very direct stances or guides or informative infographics on things that are relevant to your community, whether it's how do you get to the polls, whether it's sharing visuals on a webinar. So it's really important that in addition to putting out content consistently, you're also diversifying the type of content you're putting out there so that people can consistently be learning and engaging with you. Very similarly, this is Elizabeth Warren's page. And what I really like about Elizabeth Warren's website is, in addition to similarly how clean it is, how direct it is, how concise it is, it's also constantly changing and evolving. So they actually have an action of the day. So every day you are prompted to partake in the campaign in a different way. And then similarly in Warren's social media campaigns, so this again is her Instagram, it's also has a variety of different types of content. And it also links to each other, right? So on the Instagram, you can be, if you keep clicking through links and links and links, you could easily end up all the way back to our website. And the idea is you also constantly want to be expanding on resources so that people always have ways to learn from you and always get back to another platform of yours, whether it's your website or your social media, to learn more and always get involved. All right, so finally, I wanted to just take a couple moments to talk about individual activism actions. So in addition to advocating and being an ally through an organization, we also have to do our part as individuals to show up in our daily lives. Part of the way that you can do that through a digital platform is by expanding your digital community. So earlier when I asked everyone to do homework, this is part of it. So yes, we need to think locally. We need to make sure that we are always staying in touch with our local groups and organizations, not only in person, which we can't do anymore, but also through Facebook and Instagram and our websites, and see what events they're doing online and digitally so that you can continue to advocate for the issues that you care about. 2, acknowledge your limits. So it's quite literally impossible to be educated on every single issue. So rely on your community to reach out to people who might be able to help you, especially those who have an intersectional approach to issues. So whether that's through your friends or your family, always try and expand your community, whether it's your physical community, your interpersonal community, or your digital community. And again, expanding your digital circles. Going back to who are you following, what does your digital community look like, who are your thought leaders, and who aren't your thought leaders? How do you expand on that? How do you constantly find different perspectives from all over the political spectrum, the social spectrum, whatever it is, so that you can constantly be hearing as many perspectives and take an intersectional approach to your digital community as possible. And so some a little bit more tangible things to do, of course, educate yourself, set aside time to read books, listen to podcasts, watch TV and films, donate where you can and when you can. Again, sort of consistency is key, both in scheduling content as well as financial donations. 3, petitions, which is actually quite fitting. So even if they don't get the full required signature amount, they're a great way to raise awareness. 4, host digital activism events. I think this is a great example of one. 5, set aside time to call representatives and commit to phone banks, whether it's once a week, whether it's once a month, but you bring a friend. There are things and ways that we can all show up individually to push issues forward, bring them to the table, and make sure they're seeing positive and actionable change. So I'll send this out to you, but this is, I think, a really great way, and I'll send out this resource as well. I think it's called Home from College. This is 87 ways you can help the Black Lives Matter movement, but they also have a lot of other very actionable items for individuals to take to make sure that they are participating in whatever issue they sort of desire. But this is, again, very similarly, organizations to follow. How do you expand your digital community? Petitions to sign. How do you raise awareness and make actionable change? TVs, film, podcasts, books to read, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I'm more than happy to share all of these resources or anything else I can find in my very messy digital library of Google Drive. All right.
So there is a question in the chat that says, Sydney, are you registered to vote in November? That's one of the questions.
Yes, I am registered to vote in November.
And then the next question is, can you comment on the successfulness of different types of social media? For example, when should a person use Twitter or TikTok, etc., to target certain individuals or certain groups?
That is such a good question. And unfortunately, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that because I do not have Twitter or TikTok, but I can try and point you to other people who might. But so that is a wonderful question. And the idea is that each platform has different demographics, right? And there are different people in your community who are going to be using different platforms in different ways, right? How, even in your own personal and professional life, what I post on Instagram is not the same as what I post on LinkedIn. And certainly not the same as what I post on Facebook, but they all have a role to play. And they all have a different tone. And so I would definitely say start with whatever platform that speaks to your community the most. And the easiest way to do that is to look at the demographics that use that social platform as well as the demographics within your community. And use that data to help drive and prioritizing where you're posting and when. When you think you've got a good handle on that and you feel like you've got a good schedule and you're posting consistently, try and tackle whatever that second demographic is within your community, whether it's perhaps a younger population, right? Millennials, Gen Z, and you want to move into Instagram or TikTok, definitely start doing your research on what are other organizations like me, similar to me, doing with those platforms? How are other chapters, right, using those two platforms? How are other organizations that are similar to mine using those platforms, and use them as inspirations and guides to creating content and pushing stuff out like that?
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat box, but I think we have 1 or 2 minutes left if anyone has a final. If not, I just want to say I have found this extraordinarily interesting and helpful, and I learned a ton. I think I will be going back and looking at our website, and I will have a whole bunch of new questions that I never would have thought of to ask. So I just want to say thank you for doing this. We will be sending out the materials to everyone. Please put your email in the chat box if you are not a member of the League. We will be, this is being recorded, so we will also in our, I think, Allison, we are going to put the link in our next membership newsletter. Is that correct?
Yes, it'll be in the newsletter and posted on our website. It'll be in the section called League in the News, and that's where we have postings of programs like this.
And then hopefully once we get our Google tools up to speed, we'll be able to know how many times it gets hit, and we'll get an alert on a weekly basis. So I am very excited to try to put some of this great information and tools to use. So thank you. This was very informative and helpful. And with that, I would just like to thank everyone for taking an hour out of their busy days to share with us and to spend the time with us learning more. So thank you. Allison, do you have any last?
No, thank you so much, Sydney. This was great, and just great to have your perspective and all of these ideas. And we appreciate everyone for joining us, and hopefully everyone learned.
Thanks, Sydney.
Thank you all so much for having me, and thank you all for joining. This was a blast.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And we do encourage everyone to consider becoming a member if you're not a member. And we do have a join form on our website on the homepage. And please consider that to continue to support our work. Thanks.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.